Sputnik. I'm Wilmer Leon. Sputnik International has a piece entitled "West Came to Global Preeminence Through Robbery of Other Peoples, Has No Model of the Future." The West owes its global preeminence in large part to its historic plunder of other peoples around the world and has no model of development to offer others, according to Russian President Vladimir Putin. For insight into this assessment, we turn to our next guest. He holds the John J. and Rebecca Moores Chair of History and African American Studies at the University of Houston. He's one of the most prolific writers of our time. His latest book is entitled "The Counter-Revolution of 1836, Texas Slavery, Jim Crow, and the Roots of American Fascism." Dr. Gerald Horne, as always. Dr. Horne, welcome back.
Thank you for inviting me.
So Putin says, based on the illusion of exclusivity, this model divides people into first and second class status and is therefore racist and neocolonial in its essence. And the globalist, supposedly liberal ideology which underlies it is increasingly acquiring the features of totalitarianism, holding back creative pursuit, free historical creation. Again, that's President Putin. Dr. Horne, in analyzing speeches like this, I would always tell my students to consider the audience and that there can be more than one audience being addressed in a particular speech. When I listen to the likes of President Putin and Foreign Minister Lavrov, I get the impression they're talking to the world. I get the impression I'm listening to men who have serious understandings of history, their cultures, and their interests. When I listen to Biden and Blinken and even U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield, I always get the sense they're talking to themselves. They're talking to each other, and they're only really talking for domestic consumption, and that they believe their own press clippings. Your thoughts, Dr. Gerald Horne?
Well, certainly those quoted remarks in that piece you just referenced, it's obvious. The fact that here we are, men of African descent sitting here in North America, our very presence here is emblematic of the point that President Putin was making. That is to say, products of the unlamented African slave trade, which went on for centuries, one of the most massive migrations in human history, involuntary, of course, that led to centuries of free labor that helped to develop not only the United States of America, but also its parent, speaking of Great Britain. And speaking of Great Britain, how can you speak of Great Britain and its rise to preeminence without talking about what used to be referred to as British India? That is to say, not only India proper, but what is today Pakistan, what is today Sri Lanka, what is today Bangladesh, what is today Burma, for example. And we also should not forget the looting and plundering of China. Certainly the Chinese have not forgotten it, as symbolized by the presence of the former British colony that is Hong Kong, now part of the People's Republic of China. So what's really just unfortunate and disappointing is that remark by President Putin is the height of obviousness. But sadly and tragically, it will be viewed in certain quarters in the North Atlantic camp as a slap in the face, as an insult, and as utterly provocative. That, to me, is the problem.
There's a piece in The Cradle, India, Russia, Iran, Eurasia's new transportation powerhouses. No longer just an alternative route on a drawing board, the international north-south transportation corridor is paying dividends in a time of global crisis, and Moscow, Tehran, and New Delhi are now leading players in the Eurasian competition for transportation routes. Your thoughts on this whole evolution? And this really seems to be one of the other elements in terms of this whole development of this region at the expense of the United States.
Well, that particular article needs to be seen in the context of President Putin's recent visit to Iran. You might have seen the front page of the Wall Street Journal with his embracing the supreme leader and also the pictures of him embracing President Raisi, not to mention President Erdogan of Turkey, I think that that triumphal visit of President Putin, which apparently will lead to Iran supplying drones to Russia, which apparently has led to the inking of a multi-billion-dollar contract for Russia to help Iran develop its vast gas fields, it needs to be seen in juxtaposition of what is universally viewed as a failed visit to that part of the world by President Joseph R. Biden and his now infamous fist bump with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia, where he went on bended knee to try to get the Saudis to pump more oil, although it's unclear if the Saudis have the capacity to do so, or even if they did, they would be willing to break their de facto alliance with Russia. And so what we should realize, if we were to step back for a moment and look at this situation from 30,000 feet, is that we're witnessing a gradual but discernible shift in the global correlation of forces. To refer to the previous article, those nations that got fat on colonialism and the plunder of the Americas and the African slave trade, time has caught up with them. And you see a new international situation developing. You see this also if you juxtapose the so-called G7 meeting in Germany led by Mr. Biden with the BRICS meeting hosted by the People's Republic of China. With the BRICS meeting, you saw an application by both Argentina and Iran to join the BRICS, and then you have observers from Senegal, Ethiopia, Fiji, and nations too numerous to mention. And so I think that it's well past time to recognize that time is not on the side of U.S. imperialism nor its allies, and they would be well advised to cut their losses, not least with regard to this disaster in Ukraine, which bids fair to sink the entire German economy, as Berlin is suggesting that people take 2-minute showers. I'm not sure if you want to stick your nose into that issue, and also turn down the heat in their abodes. And so this will also have meaning, I'm afraid to say, for the domestic situation in the United States of America, because history tells us that when opportunities are constricted abroad, that repression surges at home.
We have just about a minute and a half left, and you mentioned Joe Biden's trip to Saudi Arabia. What do you see as Saudi Arabia and the UAE's motivations in terms of strengthening ties and relations with Israel? Is that due to the anticipated withdrawal of the U.S. from the region and the fear that resistance forces will overtake them, and that they're trying to formulate as good of a relationship with Israel as they can to offset what they perceive to be the rise of resistance forces? We have about a minute and a half.
I think that there's something to that. Obviously, these monarchies, these Gulf despots, they're living on borrowed time. They may ironically need to call upon the Israelis to save their skin because of their anti-popular policies. However, on the other hand, I do expect Saudi Arabia to try to improve its relations with Iran, which further undercuts U.S. imperialism, which only has to offer its military. It has little to offer beyond that. And I think as well that will be undercutting for Israel as well. Perhaps as a result, the Israeli lobby will see fit in the United States to spend less time trying to destabilize congressional races, such as the one in Maryland involving Donna Edwards, and more time trying to help the Israeli leadership rethink their disastrous policies.
Dr. Gerald Horne, as always, thank you so much for your time. Greatly appreciate that analysis. We look forward to having you back.